So our next conversation, we're switching things up completely. It's a conversation on, I say, passion, fact. Well, this is not gamified human body. Let me go back because we switched around for the trains. But if we get this right, passion, purpose, and fiction. We have Pietro from Greenberg Traurig Santa Maria, and Pietro Caliceti is not only an incredible M&A attorney based in Italy and works with global companies around the world, but he's also an author. We have Jason returning to moderate this panel, and let's get started to have this conversation on passion, purpose, and fiction, and why an attorney wants to write books.
Sorry to subject everyone to my dulcet tones for the second time. Gabriel, we're going to have to talk about my appearance fee for next year, but I'm super pleased to welcome Pietro here. We generally do like a pre-talk before we do these panels, and I was in Australia and managed to line up a time to chat, and completely blew the time that we'd scheduled because we just kept chatting, and it's an amazing story. So super happy that you can join us here today. We are going to talk a little bit about AI regulation, and then we're going to try and bridge the gap and do some nice segueing into fiction, and Pietro can talk about how he's sold 3 times as many books as I have. But as a start, maybe Pietro, if you want to introduce yourself to everyone and tell us how you got here.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is my first time at Techtalia, and I'm very pleased to be here. What can I say about myself? I'm an M&A and corporate lawyer, 35 years expertise, I think. And my job and what I really like to do is do deals, and I've done many deals all around the world, not only in Italy, but I mean, literally, apart from South America, I think I've done deal anywhere else. And actually, what I like most about my work is where I have the opportunity to do something abroad, to connect cultures that are different. And when it happens, it's a pleasure. And
perfect.
That's
a great start.
And as Jason mentioned, in the last 10 years, I've also started coupling my basic work, which is being a lawyer, with that of writing novels. Because I've always been an avid reader, and I've always been very fond of authors like John Grisham, Scott, and I've always wondered why in Italy no one had ever did anything like them. I mean, you have good lawyers in Italy, you have good writers in Italy, you have writers who are lawyers also, but you never, or at least in my view, as I saw it, you never had someone that could tell a story like John Grisham did, where the fact of being a lawyer, writing the book, and the fact of a lawyer being the main character of a book was actually key to the plot. Right. So that's what why I started, and actually, there's also a more romantic side to it, which we may
we'll definitely get there. We'll stick to the small section on law, so we don't send everyone to sleep. And just a little bit about AI regulation. So you've probably seen it's rampant all over the place. I was reading up a little bit in California, where I live. There's been 38 AI bills tabled in California alone. 18 of them have passed and are now law, with SB 1047 kind of famously getting vetoed by the governor not that long ago, a week or so ago, which was seen as a fairly overarching AI regulation that might translate into a national act. The EU's got a little bit ahead of the game here. I think 2021, the AI Act was first tabled to European Parliament and then came into force August the 1st, if I believe.
Yeah, August the 2nd.
Yep.
And yes, AI is the regulatory issue of the moment, yes, as you know, and yes, the EU was the first organism to regulate that. The work for drafting this act was a long one. It took like 2 years, and finally the act became enacted on August 2. Which doesn't mean it is completely in force. It has many sections that will become into force in different times, and the final date for it to be completely in force is 2030.
Okay.
But from January 2025, a significant numbers of provisions will already be enforced, and essentially the way the EU Act is construed is that it's a risk-based approach, as opposed to the Californian Act that was a totally different approach. But the EU Act essentially identifies 4 areas of risks. An acceptable risk, which is, for example, AI practices that can manipulate how one person votes or takes important decisions. That area is that kind of practice is completely forbidden, and it will be completely forbidden from January 2025. Then below that, there are areas of high risk, areas of medium risk, and areas that are considered little or no risks. And the gray area is actually the distinction between high risk and medium risk. Because if your activity is considered high risk activity, then your company will be under very strict regulations in terms of corporate governance, compliance, internal processes, liability, and that will apply from 2026. And it will apply not only to the producer of the AI system, but also to any deployer. So, for example, there was a very good question before the intermission about the tool that we saw in Luca Gonelli's company, which, by the way, I find very, very interesting as a product. But there was a question about liability when you said, you know, we saw a suggestion in terms of how can I spend my money, where shall I invest, and under the new regulations that will apply when the EU AI Act will be completely enforced, I'm not completely sure that that product will be free from liability.
Right.
Also, if, as Luca pointed out, it's their customers' choice at the end of the day. So it's a very complex set of regulation, which is very boring, actually, to read, and but it's something that everyone, I think, in this room should be very aware of.
And then I guess, you know, the inverse of what we see in the US, where things quite often start at a state level and then may or may not get regulated at a federal level. From an EU perspective, obviously the member states are now free to create their own legislation. What's happening in Italy and the kind of touch points that the Italian government is focusing on?
In Italy and in EU in general, the approach of the European regulators was aimed at having a regulation that applies consistently all around. But that, in my opinion, has not been achieved completely, because the way the Act is drafted, there are still rooms for interpretation and detailed regulation at the level of the various member countries, which may lead ultimately to different to different ways of applying the Act in practice. Right. And that's one of the key concerns that are on the table at the moment at the EU level.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting space to see where the kind of regulation plays out. I mean, obviously, there's an argument that too much regulation is going to stifle some form of innovation, which was obviously a large part of the reaction that we started to see in the US around some of those acts that were being tabled.
Yes, it's a double-edged argument, because if you see it in another way, it could also pose a barrier, an entry barrier to people that want to enter the market. Mm-hmm. So it's different. Yeah. So it may ultimately be a good thing for the really big players that are currently on the market.
They're obviously the ones that spend all the money on Capitol Hill, as the way it works. So now we're going to try my very poor bridge here to segue into somehow authorship. But we, I think a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs are using AI as a force multiplier. There's this talk that one day we'll get the sort of one-person, billion-dollar unicorn company where they basically just use all this AI to do stuff. I think loads of people use soft AI in the forms of things like Notion. Hopefully no one's using ChatGPT to write their pitch decks, but I'm sure there are people out there that are doing that. The legal profession's sort of an interesting one because it's got a lot of focus, and there's software that's come out where we're talking about, being able to review contracts and kind of do red lines and all of those sorts of things. I personally don't buy into it. I pay $650 an hour to speak to a partner, not because they can edit documents, because they've been in a call room and they've done lots of things. So I don't kind of buy into, AI is going to take our jobs. But I guess from your perspective, and in our chat, we sort of spoke about some of the more softer sides of negotiations. How do you see that kind of fitting into place of where AI will make your job easier, and then the parts where your experience without AI is really what folks are paying for when they
well, for sure AI will make things much easier with respect to research, documents review, etc. But there are for sure certain things that AI will never be able to do. First of all, AI is designed to provide answers, and to provide answers quickly. And the more quick, the better the AI is. Now, that is not really always the best thing to do, at least in a negotiation. And one of the most famous Latin philosophers, Cicero, once told that silence is a great art of negotiation. And that's true, I think. But the same goes for pace, for slowness. Sometimes, in my experience in negotiation, not answering or just be silent or disappearing sometime from the negotiation table has proved to be a very sharp negotiation tool. And the other thing that AI will never be able to do is, or actually it cannot do, is to make you think, to make you really shift the pattern. I mean, there was something in a previous talk, I think, with when in the presentation of Lorenzo di Bonaventura, when he spoke about surprise and the fact that AI tools will never, or very unlikely, able to achieve surprise because they are designed to reason to replicate reasoning. And that's the same goes for legal reasoning. The best ideas that I had in my career were ideas that changed the subject or the way the problem had been approached so far. And that's actually a risk for our own reasoning, not only for legal reasoning, but in general, because the key is what questions you put to the AI. And since the AI is designed to provide you answers that in the way that most likely will be the customary answer. There is a risk that our own brain architecture at one point in time becomes accustomed to posing our own questions in the way that we expect the tool to react. So our own brain risks to be shifted where to a way of reasoning where our questions will all be the same, and that's really a risk as I see it. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. We could kind of talk about this for hours. They say that every journalist has a book inside them. Do you think every lawyer has a book inside them? And how did you get to this sort of transitionary passion project? Well, I guess it is. You know, Techtalia is Gabriel's passion project. Your passion project is writing these books.
Yeah.
How did it all come about?
Well, many times in my career, I realized when I was possibly at a negotiation table, I find myself thinking, well, this seems like a movie, and at some point in time in 2013, I was in Libya. I was with a client, and we were negotiating a big contract with the Libyan government. It was in the post-Gaddafi Libya, and we managed to conclude, to reach a deal, and so everything was prepared for a very big ceremony for the signing. The Libyan minister was about to come. The Italian ambassador was expected to come. TV, radio, all the stuff. And in the morning of the day when we were supposed to sign the contract, I wake up and I see the client that is all fussed up, and I ask him, what's happened? And he told me, don't you know, they kidnapped the prime minister. It was October 10, 2013, and I said, well, who did it and why? And he said, well, nobody knows. Nobody knows if he's alive, who kidnapped it, why, what is happening. It seems it's a coup d'etat. The only thing we know is that they closed the international airport, so no one is going nowhere from here. And I said, okay, I'll never be back home. But fortunately, in the same inexplicable way that they kidnapped it, after 10 hours, they just released him. So we took the first plane, we went back home, and I said to myself, well, maybe this is really worth writing, and so I started.
Fantastic. All right, do we have any questions from the audience? One question.
Please.
Yes. Which of your books is most obviously connected to something that really happened in your long career?
This is, this is a good question. Actually, the way I like to write books is all of them. I've published 4 so far, and what is the main common feature of all of them is that every one of my books is based on true facts that have happened, but within which I imagine connections that no one had ever thought of. And the first of my books, that's called The Last Client, was actually about this experience in Libya. But the second book of mine was also interesting, I think, for this audience today, because it was, and I think still is, the first and only novel on Bitcoin all over the world. And I published it I wrote in 2014, 10 years ago, and it was published in 2015. And it is about a SPAC, and that's the part that comes from my experience. I was one of the lawyers who worked on the first SPAC in Italy, the first business combination. So I had the experience of negotiating that deal and to see how the normal arguments you use in an M&A transactions do not completely apply to SPAC deals. So I imagine that in 2013, 2014, when Bitcoin was still in a very uncertain phase, there is an Italian SPAC that already collected the money, but they are running out of time to complete the business combination, so they are under the risk of giving back the money to investors. And when they are struggling in that situation, a bunch of guys from Jersey come to Milan and they tell them about Bitcoin that the Italians had never heard of, and this guy fall completely in love with the idea, and they invest everything in it, and then I'll let you know. So that was an interesting story to tell, also because to understand Bitcoin and why is it so successful, you need to study the history of money. And that's a really fascinating subject. And there was a question before the intermission about trust and how can we trust something that is not governed by a central authority. And if you study the history of money, you see that money was born without a central authority. The first example of money date from 400, 500 before Christ, much before the first states were founded. So it's really fascinating studying that, because you understand that the only thing that matters about money is actually trust. And if this trust is present, anything can serve as money, and the history of money proves it. During the course of years, money, anything has served as money, from shark teeth to stones to whatever. Yeah, seashells, and even without circulation. For instance, in a small island near New Guinea, I think, the money they use are huge stones that are underwater, and they circulate just by consensus, because the people of the tribe agree that a certain piece of that stone belongs to Mr. X rather than Mr. Y. So it's actually a very interesting thing to learn and go through.
Excellent. All right, I think we are getting the wind up. So with that, thank you very much, Pietro.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Pietro Caliceti.